is Drive with Gary Hargrave on Brisbane's 4BC.
25 to 4, as I said, I'm not a smoker, never been a smoker, so don't get on the darts of the durries. But there is something seriously wrong here with what's happened. This latest incident in Logan last night, Browns Plains, a suspicious fire at a tobacco shop has left 2 blokes injured. They've stayed inside the shop because there's been threats to the shop. They've stayed inside the shop and someone's got in, spread accelerant around, set fire to the place. It's awful. The details of the blaze still emerging, but it points to a larger, darker issue, which is not a simmering. I think it's coming to a boil right around Australia. But let's just deal with what's happening here in southeast Queensland. The illegal tobacco trade. It's big business. There's this very shadowy sort of underworld operating, and that's right. Criminals will always see an opportunity and run to it. I get it. But there are so many in the community who probably don't realise it. How come tobacco shops are burning down? People say to me, well, here's one of the reasons why, I think. Because government has decided to make the price of smoke so darn expensive that the underground system is flourishing. So anybody selling legitimate cigarettes, they've got to get them out of the way. It's bad for their illegal business. So these places are right under our noses. We see them on the streets all around town, some of these chop shops. That's how confident they are. Let's try and pull it all apart. A growing criminal enterprise, a bloke who understands a lot of this stuff. He's an associate professor of criminal justice and criminology at Bond University, Dr Terry Goldsworthy. Terry, great to talk to you again. Another tobacco shop, another day. Are the crims winning, or is this stupidity going to ever stop?
Yeah, good afternoon, Gary. Look, I think it's not going to stop in the short term, that's for sure. We're probably a bit behind Victoria, which has had this problem now for a couple of years. And, they're in excess of 125 or thereabouts arson attacks that they can relate to the tobacco wars down there. So you're quite right saying that a number of other states have got problems, New South Wales, WA and Victoria. Up here, we've had Task Force MASHA put in place by the Queensland Police Service, and they have admitted themselves that they think there's dozens of attacks that have occurred now that are part of this ongoing competition for turf in terms of the illicit tobacco market. So I think it's going to get much worse. I'd like to see how many resources, I should say, are being put into it by the QPS. It's a kind of a problematic area to police because it's essentially a health problem initially in terms of closing down the illicit stores. But then, of course, you have the serious criminal activity, organised criminal activity, coming on the back of that. So it's probably time, if it hasn't happened already, that the police become the lead agency in this response and start taking it forward with sufficient resources to get on top of it.
But the arson, the damage to other businesses next to these tobacco shops, everything's just getting driven further and further out of sight, but it's not out of mind. I mean, as one listener has said, David, he said 25 grams of taxed tobacco is $95, 25 grams of illegal tobacco is $10. And doesn't it stand to reason addicted people will want to buy the cheap stuff? So the cheap stuff has got a market out there.
Yeah, it has. You can buy, the police gave the price of illegal tobacco, $9 to $15 for a pack compared to $40 for legitimate cigarettes. So, there are millions of dollars worth in this. And if you look at some of the data put out by the Queensland government recently, beginning of the month, they had Operation Appaloosa, and they seized 76,000 vapes, about 19 million illicit cigarettes, 3.5 tonnes of illicit tobacco, which is a value of about $21 million. So there is big money in it. And, organised crime is very smart. It realises when there's a market, and it realises when there's a very profitable market. And they have done that in terms of, we have introduced policies for health reasons, etc., regulatory reasons to increase the price of cigarettes. And they have seen that there's an opportunity to make a thriving black market. And now we're seeing the competition for control of that thriving market.
But Terry Goldsworthy, the problem is the police, as you know. They're always having to wait for that bit of legislation to give them the protection to interdict, to deal with these things. The lawbreakers aren't worried about that. They just always stay steps ahead of the law on these things.
Yeah, look, I mean, the government has introduced some fines, substantial fines for individuals and businesses in terms of, up to $32,000 for an individual and $160,000 for a business in terms of selling illegal vapes. But, the problem you've got, Gary, is that you've got organised crime, and we're talking about transnational organised crime. There is evidence that there's already overseas groups involved in this. And we know from the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, 70% of our organised crime threats have an offshore link. You've got to deal with the fact that you have legitimate businesses being targeted to become fronts for the crime gangs, and then they're setting up their own crime gangs. So you have extortion taking place to get these legitimate businesses to start to trade in the illicit business. So they're almost being forced into criminality, and where they don't adhere to this, then you're seeing the attacks take place. It's also the attacks are there to take out competition. So you've got a couple of facets in terms of the attacks. We have seen murders occur interstate in relation to this. I think overnight we were very lucky we didn't have 2 deaths in Queensland. So it's quickly becoming a peak criminal issue. And that's why I suggested, I think, if they're not already, the Queensland Police need to be the lead agency in terms of how we respond. And this needs to be treated like any other organised crime problem. We have the offences on the books, arsons, murder, extortion, all those things. It really needs a close focus, sufficient resourcing, adequate budget for the police to get in there and do what they need to do. And, I guess, we've got the health response on the side, the health policy that's caused this. We need to go back and look at, is there something smarter we can do in terms of health policy to achieve the same aims without giving a free kick to organised crime to have this illicit black market?
Well, I guess I'll get to that in a moment, but surely, this is like the movies. This is like the south side of Chicago in the 1920s. This is just like prohibition in America as it was. People who were running illicit hooch in the boots of their cars to get it past the prohibition police when alcohol was restricted or prohibited. This is the same kind of stuff. They were violent times, according to all the movies. I'm sure you've studied it. This violence is now really evident in suburban areas.
It is, and it's. I guess if you look at the demand for cigarettes, it's a bit like a balloon. You can put these things in place and push the balloon. The balloon doesn't get smaller. The balloon just moves. And what they've done is they've moved into the illicit market. And we saw this in Canada when they legalised marijuana. It didn't necessarily stop marijuana use. They just went to the black market because it was better marijuana and cheaper marijuana. So, these policy responses we put in place often have, I guess, unintended consequences. And organised crime they're switched on. They will look at what's happening in terms of policies and go, what is the gap there that we can take advantage of and exploit? And, they look at things. If you look at back in the early 2000s, heroin became very problematic to obtain in Australia. So the criminal gangs just moved into crystal meth, and we've still got the ongoing problems from that. So, you need to kind of be looking and further ahead, scanning the environment, the criminal environment, if you're a senior law enforcement or intelligence officer or the government, and saying, when we do this and make these cigarettes $40 a pack, what is the likely outcome going to be? That people will stop using it, or will they look for alternative markets? And clearly the evidence of many times we've seen they will look for alternative markets.
So the police would be, intelligence people in the police services and forces around Australia, they'd be the ones that could handle that, to your point, that police need to probably have carriage of this. But it was health officials at the federal level in sort of that period from about 2008 through to 2012 that decided if we increase the price point, if we make it more expensive, people will stop smoking. They've driven this whole thing, the plain packaging and all of this sort of stuff. They have actually created this opportunity for the crooks.
Yeah, look, I'd imagine, I'm not across the health responses for cigarettes in terms of what they've done there exactly, but I guess there is a tipping point where people go, I'll pay $25 for a packet, I'll pay $30. And then there's a tipping point where you can just keep on raising the price and they will go, well, that's no longer an option for me. And I think we've hit that tipping point. If you're a pack-a-day person, and, I used to know plenty of police would smoke a pack a day, that's a lot of money over a fortnight or a week to be putting into cigarettes. Now, if you've got a cheaper, viable option with all the other cost of living things we have, I would think it would be a no-brainer that you will probably try to access that. Because I don't think there's any necessarily great fines or anything coming for the people who are buying them. It seems to be all targeted at the people selling them, which is probably appropriate. But if it's a low-risk enterprise for you to go and try and buy some illicit stuff and you're going to save a couple $100 every week, many people will do that.
So, Terry Goldsworthy, do we go all Elliot Ness and just Ness and simply start raiding every tobacco shop and seeing whether there's anything illegal there? In other words, really crack down on what looks like legitimate businesses, as well as crack down on the ones that we know that are not. Have we got to do this multi-prong approach, do you think?
Well, I think that's one aspect of it. I mean, just yesterday the government announced they'd done some raids and raided 20 shops, etc., and seized money, cars, etc. So that's ongoing. I think there needs to be some really good engagement with industry, tobacconists, etc., identify them or engage with them and say, this is what's happening. This is the kind of course of conduct we're seeing. If you want to engage in illicit activity, then we'll treat you like, you're a partner of organised crime. If, however, you're a victim of crime and been extorted to engage in this behaviour, we want you to come and speak to us. So I think they really need to ensure they've got good lines of communication with the market. Queensland Health and the police probably need to sit down with the federal government and look at the regulation of cigarettes. And given that this is becoming a national problem, look at what they've done, that policy. Is it achieving what they want? Like, are we seeing a reduction in cigarette use? I mean, if we're not, then obviously, raising these prices is irrelevant because it's not achieving the ultimate goal it's meant to.
Well, I guess
we need to be looking at all of those things, Gary, I think, and saying, is there a better way to do this?
Yeah, because currently this kind of lift the price up and people will stop smoking thing, I think, has triggered more criminal activity than anything else. And by the way, Terry, I've been around long enough to remember the conversation at the time was that's what would happen. And everyone said, oh, no, that would never happen. And it has. With the criminal activity was going to kick in to offer the smokes at a cheaper price. So it's a mess. We'll stay in touch. Good to talk to you always. Appreciate your time, Professor Terry Goldsworthy. He is a former police officer and he is, of course, knows the criminology stuff inside and out. I mean, this is crazy. Government-induced stupidity is what it is. And you've got the health department saying, oh, no, we'll increase the price. And by the way, the tax departments of each government, state and federal, love it because they get more money in the forms of taxes. And then they leave the mess for the police to clean up. I think the police have got to actually put a bit of that intelligence work to work and tell those other departments this is how we're going to do it, because it's now impacting corner stores near where you live. That's the sort of thing that's going on.